Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are joining us today for another exciting power talk that we have lined up for you as part of the ICF India Conclave on a topic that's assumed more significance if ever before in today's world post-pandemic. Wherever you are calling in from, whether you're Indian, American, British, French, Chinese, different cultures, different ways of looking at the world, different languages and perspectives. Cultures differ in how they articulate, how they listen, how they receive information, and how they take action. How does one interpret body language and mannerisms? Managing, communicating, and coaching across cultures can be daunting, and even more so in a virtual remotopia world that we are in today. How are we as coaches prepared to step out of our comfort zones and cultivate global dexterity? Well, we couldn't have asked for a more distinguished lineup of speakers today. We have with us two speakers. Carol, welcome. Carol Wilson is the founder and CEO of Culture at Work, a fellow of the ILM, fellow of the Professional Speaking Association, and an honorary life fellow and former head of professional standards and excellence at the Association for Coaching. Carol is a specialist in cross-cultural coaching and has designed corporate coaching and leadership programs delivered in 42 countries. I had to read that twice. That's 42 countries, folks, and is the author of Performance Coaching, a complete guide to best practice coaching and training, featuring forewords by no less than Sir John Whitmore, and her former co-worker, Sir Richard Branson. Carol, welcome, and we're delighted to have you here today.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Our other speaker today, and upfront apologies, was to be Professor Philippe Rozinski, MCC. Philippe can't be here in person today, but he took the trouble to record a very, very interesting set of perspectives, which we will be playing for you. Philippe is considered a pioneer of intercultural and global coaching. He is the author of two seminal books, Coaching Across Cultures and Global Coaching. For almost 30 years and across continents, Philippe has helped people and organizations thrive and make a difference in the world. He is the first European to have been designated with the MCC, Master Certified Coach, by the ICF. Philippe is principal of Rozinski and Company and a professor at the Kenichi Omahe School of Business in Tokyo. Philippe has received numerous awards and has been listed among the Global Coaching Gurus Top 30 in 2021. I couldn't have asked for a better panel. So, Carol, with your permission, we will start with Philippe's video and then have you join us back to hear your perspectives, if that's all right. So, welcome, everyone. Just a minute. And
hello, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you at the ICF India Conclave 2021. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to be with you today for this recording. Go, Ray. Thank you. So I'd like to say a few words about coaching across cultures. And maybe the first point is that cultural differences, unfortunately, are often a source of difficulties, a source of challenges, conflicts, frustrations, missed opportunities, financial loss. Diversity can be, unfortunately, a source of division. But it doesn't have to be that way. The good news is that cultural differences could be and can be a source of richness. But it's not enough to say that, to declare that. We need to do something if we want to make the most of cultural differences. And that's what coaching across cultures is about. It's really about unleashing the potential in cultural diversity. When we do that, there are several benefits. One is that it will promote creativity and innovation. And there is some research that I will briefly mention to back this up. And I have had this experience as well. Making the most of differences can really promote creativity and innovation. It can promote engagement as opposed to disengagement and even alienation. It can bring diversity and inclusion initiatives to the next level. It can help to improve performance, fulfillment. It's really about promoting flourishing for people themselves, for their organization, and for society overall. So I've been on this journey for many years realizing that if you look at traditional leadership and coaching, there's assumed a worldview that is insufficient, increasingly insufficient to address the complex challenge that we face today. And for example, you know, we are here with ICF. I've been a member for the ICF for a very long time. I have great respect for the ICF. But it's only recently that ICF has changed the definition of core competencies. One of the core competence was direct communication, meaning that if you want to be a good communicator, you need to be direct. I have a friend in the US who says that that's not even enough. If you want to be effective, you need to be blunt, you need to confront people. It just happens that I've been a professor in Japan for over 10 years now, and I can tell you that if you're only going to be direct, you risk alienating people, and that's going to be the end of the conversation and the end of the coaching right there. There is something else called indirect communication, which is about promoting sensitivity, ensuring that nobody loses face. And so this is just a simple example to say that direct communication, for example, is not a panacea. We need to realize that there are other ways of communicating that could be appropriate as well. What I've set out to do is to try to integrate this cultural perspective into coaching and leadership in a systematic fashion, because strangely, this had not been done before. So let me say a few words to explain this. I've defined coaching as the art of facilitating the unleashing of people's potential to reach meaningful, important objectives. And so as coaches, we all know that we believe that people have more potential than what they are currently able to display. But the idea with coaching across cultures is to deploy even more potential by tapping into the richness that lies in cultural diversity. So let me say this differently. If we look at the goals of coaching across cultures, what are the objectives? What are we trying to accomplish with coaching across cultures? I would say there are two main goals, two main objectives. One is to enable more effective work across cultures, although not only in an international sense, across all forms of cultural differences. That's the first goal. But the more fundamental goal is that it is about promoting a more creative and complete form of coaching. And the reason I say this is that coaching across cultures is really an invitation to challenge our cultural assumptions, to go beyond our previous limitations. We don't necessarily have to do this all the time, but if we realize that at some point, our way of thinking, our way of communicating, our way of managing time, our way of organizing ourselves proves to be ineffective or limiting, we don't need to be stuck there. We have a fantastic opportunity to learn from other cultures, to find out how are they dealing with similar challenges. What can we learn from them so we are not stuck with our cultural views, our cultural assumptions, but we can go beyond those assumptions to just have more options available. And in that sense, coaching across cultures is a more creative form of coaching. So I need to define what I mean by culture. There are different definitions, but the one I would like to propose is that it's a set of characteristics. A group's culture is a set of characteristics that would distinguish the member of one group from the member of another group. And if you look at this definition, an immediate implication is that, in fact, we have multiple cultures. Strangely, I often hear people talk about their culture as if they only had one culture, but typically we all belong to several groups at the same time. I can be from a certain country. I can also be from a certain organization. I can be from a certain generation. And each of these groups I belong to has certain cultural characteristics. And in fact, our behaviors are going to depend on the group we are associated with at a moment in time. When I'm with some of my friends, we will tease each other. It's okay in that context. But now, if I'm in a serious business meeting, that same behavior that I had with my friends would no longer be appropriate. So my behavior will depend on the group I'm associated with. And that is true, I would think, for everybody. one of the issues, by the way, is that sometimes you see managers or coaches being very effective in one context with one group of people, and now they are with another group of people, they reproduce the same behavior. And that behavior that may have been effective in one context is no longer effective in this other context. So we need to be able to recognize the fact that, hey, our behaviors will probably need to adapt to vary depending on the context. So what characteristics am I talking about? I'm talking both about visible characteristics, and this is a classical model representing culture as an onion rings, or also there is this iceberg model suggesting that there is a visible part to culture, but also the invisible part. So the visible part to do with products, artifacts, objects, and behaviors we can see. But it's interesting to also realize that underneath there are norms, values, and basic assumptions that are connected to those behaviors. So for example, going back to my direct-indirect example, a norm could be in some cultures that we should speak in a very straightforward fashion and that it's okay to offend people. That could be in some cultures the norm. And in other cultures, the norm is that we should be very sensitive and it's not appropriate to offend somebody. So who is right, who is wrong? I don't know. But if you look at the values here, values is what is important for a particular group of people. For direct communication, the underlying value would be clarity. That's what is most important. And for indirect communication, the underlying value is sensitivity. As an intercultural coach, for me, it's not about saying this one is right and this one is wrong, but to just be open to the possibility that multiple norms and values can exist, that no one is right in an absolute sense and no right is wrong. But the question is, in a very pragmatic sense, how effective is this norm for you and for people you are serving right now? So if being clear is working for you and for people around you, hey, that's great. But that doesn't mean that the other norm and the other value doesn't have merits either. So we want to open ourselves to norms and values that may be different than our own norms and values, and that could serve us at times to just have more options available. And the good news, as we will see, is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. If we could be clear and sensitive at the same time, that would be the best of all. If we look at basic assumptions, this is even more to the center of the onion. This has to do with how we are addressing some of the universal challenges that we face. And different groups have come up with different ways of addressing the challenges. And typically, we are not even conscious about that. Let me give an example. Control. This notion that we are in charge of our destiny. If we work hard, we persevere, we can achieve anything. That has been part of the American dream, the US culture, has been very much associated with coaching. If you think of Tony Robbins and his book, Unlimited Power, we have unlimited power. That's what he suggests. And that's good news because it works as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I believe I can achieve anything, I'm likely to take various steps and believe I can do it. And ultimately, I may achieve success even against all odds. So that's the good news when we believe we can achieve anything. The problem is, I don't know about you, but in my experience, we do not have all the power. There is something called fate, luck, however you want to call it. Inshallah, there is power outside of us as well. And if we don't see that, if we only see the control part, the risk is that we may go beyond our limitations. We may push ourselves beyond our limitations, which may involve, for example, cheating, pushing others beyond their limitation, pushing the planet beyond its limitation to regenerate itself as well. So that's the issue with control. Humility, on the other hand, if we take this literally, then we have a problem as well, because this would suggest that we don't have power. So it's only a question of fate and luck. There is not much we can do about our destiny. So we could say, well, then we might as well stop doing any work, stop coaching. But the idea is that there is wisdom here. And the wisdom is that it's just an invitation to appreciate our own limitations and to take those limitations into account. And the good news is that we could combine the two. When we combine the two perspectives here, it will look like acting with determination, believe that we can act with determination, doing as if we had all the control, while recognizing that at the same time that it's not going to be only up to us, that luck, fate may have something to do with our success. If we are able to act with determination, while at the same time learn to let go what is beyond our control, we may be better able to achieve sustainable success as opposed to success against all odds. So that's the idea of combining the different polarities here. And I could say something similar about time. Some cultures, if you consider that time is scarce, there is never enough time to do all the things you need to do. And if I believe that as a coach, I will help my clients be even more efficient, be even more productive. That's great. But the problem is that my coaches can become overwhelmed because they've become so productive that they take on a lot of work, a lot of things. And they may be working very hard and very efficiently, but not necessarily very effectively, meaning that they may do a lot of things, but not necessarily spend time on what matters the most. And for that, a different perspective is needed, which is plentiful time. If I believe that time is plentiful, now I can slow down. I can take time to regain perspective and to discern what is truly important. I can become effective, meaning I do the right things as opposed to just being efficient doing things right. And again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. But if as a coach, I'm not aware of this, I may just collude with my client who asks me to do a lot of things in a short amount of time. And by doing that, what may happen is that if I try to coach a team in a couple of hours, I may not give team members an opportunity to really step back, reflect, build relationship, and discern what is truly important for them. So again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. The good news is that we can have efficiency as well as effectiveness. But for that, we need to be able to be mindful of our own cultural preferences and not fall prey to those. The philosophy here, in other words, what I'm trying to convey is that culture doesn't have to be something exclusive and static. It doesn't have to be either this or that in a static fashion. We try to emphasize here an inclusive and dynamic view of culture. We are promoting the synthesis of cultural differences, direct and indirect communication, scarce time and plentiful time, control and humility. So we are not stuck with just one way, but we have often an opportunity to make the most of the differences. And when we do that, that's how we can have mutual enrichment. That's how we can have unity in diversity. So the whole message, my message here is that we have a fantastic opportunity to learn and grow by learning actually from alternative cultural perspectives. But that implies being aware of our own cultural biases. We all have biases, to realize that, yes, sometimes these biases may lead us to not be able to use our full potential. And now we have an opportunity to learn from other cultures. But in order to do that, we need a roadmap to navigate this cultural terrain, because there are so many values, so many norms, so many assumptions we can make. How can we find our ways? And the roadmap that I would like to propose is based upon the work of many interculturalists. I have not reinvented the wheel. And they've come up with this concept of cultural orientation, an inclination to think, feel, act in a way that is determined by culture, or at least influenced by culture. I've given some examples already, direct versus indirect, communication, scarce time versus plentiful time. When we use these cultural orientations, we are not going to be able to describe the whole cultural terrain, but we will be able to describe salient characteristics that we can take into account. And what I've done is regrouped a number of these dimensions into 7 categories. And if you look at those, I think you will agree with me that they make sense, that they are important. We need to be mindful as coaches, but also as leaders, that there are different ways of managing time, different ways of thinking, different ways of communicating, different ways of organizing ourselves. So that's the cultural orientation framework model that I've created, building upon the work of many interculturalists. And you see here, the model has 17 orientations. And in fact, the tool, there is an online tool that gives you the possibility to create even more dimensions. And that the goal here is not so much to categorize people, but to give ourselves an opportunity to reflect on what are our biases, what are some of the orientations we tend to overuse, and conversely, what may be the orientations that we may underuse, and that could represent growth opportunities for us. So, for example, if for me time is always scarce, I may tend to overuse that, and consequently, I may have learned to be very productive, but I'm always in a rush. I may feel overwhelmed. So the opportunity for me would be to consider time in a more plentiful fashion. That's the underused orientation that represents a growth opportunity, would allow me to just slow down, relax, and discern what is more important. And again, that's just one example, but we could do that for all these 17 dimensions. That gives us several opportunities for growth. The applications are at multiple levels, but before I share that, I just want to invite you all to look at the website cofassessment.com. You can take the COF assessment. There is a complimentary version that I invite you to take, and you can complete the assessment. And what I would invite you to do is even to pair up with a fellow participant at the conference to exchange feedback on your results, to discuss those results, because the results don't matter per se, but what is interesting is that this can be the beginning of a conversation to raise your own awareness about your cultural orientations. And given those orientations, how does that translate in the way you coach? What is effective there, but what may be perhaps not so effective, and what would be the growth opportunities that you can find? So that's an invitation for you all. But in terms of the applications, really, the applications are at 4 levels. First is the individual level, and it all starts with the self. If as a coach, I want to be able to coach others across cultures, I need to be mindful of my own cultural preferences, my own cultural orientations. And so it all starts with self-coaching. You don't need to do this alone. You could work with a peer, but to just raise your own awareness. Then you can start to apply this in one-on-one situations, one-on-one coaching situations. So I tend to systematically integrate this into my coaching. I tend to coach from multiple perspectives, but one of the perspectives is culture. And that just gives, again, opportunities for raising your own awareness and for discovering avenues for development. So that's one-on-one coaching. Another area of application is team coaching. I'll say more in a moment about this. That's a very important area of application. A third area is organizational development. I will just mention this. Merger, acquisitions, alliances are ways for organizations to develop. It turns out that the statistics are just terrible. Many of these ventures, over half of these ventures, fail. And there are different reasons for that. But according to several research studies, the number one reason is culture. Or, to be more precise, a lack of understanding of the cultural differences and what it takes to make the most of the cultural differences. The good news, though, is that if you learn about intercultural coaching, and if you integrate intercultural coaching in organization development, you can turn the situation around completely and use culture as an asset, as opposed to a liability. And a last area of application, last but certainly not least, is that if you look at the world today, if we could all play a part to promote a bit more unity in diversity in the world today, I think we would do something beneficial, because there are still a lot of polarizations, divisions, and conflict. And if we are able to instead promote more unity, we could play our part, even a modest part, but our part to promote societal progress. So that's another area of application. These areas are all interconnected, of course. Let me say a few words about team development. Working as a team is a challenge, even when the team is physically together, when the members are physically together and when the members are rather homogeneous. But these days, if that is not enough as a challenge, what we notice is that we have typically geographic distance. We are not together physically. That creates an additional level of complexity, and diversity is there as well, different forms of diversity. So I would argue that if we want to tap into address both distance and diversity as additional challenges, we absolutely need a form of team coaching that goes beyond traditional team coaching, which doesn't integrate the cultural perspective. We absolutely need to include the cultural perspective into our team development approach. The good news is that when cultural diversity is leveraged, we will promote creativity and innovation. This is based on the work by Kassustin, Redasti, Kassustin at Harvard University. What he found based on several research studies is that if you're able to cultivate diversity, and here he meant cognitive diversity, not just demographics, but the fact of having people with different ideas, different perspectives, if you're able to cultivate that together with some form of constructive dissent, that's how you can promote creativity and innovation. He doesn't go into the detail, though, on how you do this in practice. And that's where coaching across culture comes in, to help deploy, cultivate this cognitive diversity. And again, the philosophy here is at the heart of leveraging cultural diversity is this idea that we are not just trying to adapt to a different culture. We are not just wanting to learn from a different culture to adapt to it, but we want to learn from different cultures to grow as human beings and to grow as coaches. So we will be proactively looking for gems in different cultures, not just to adapt to that culture, but to increase our own worldview, to expand our own worldview, and to grow as a human being and as a coach. And if we have that attitude, it turns out that tends to be contagious. If I'm genuinely interested in other cultures, people are more likely to have an interest in my culture than if I come to people and I say, Gori, you should do it my way. My culture is superior to yours, so you're going to do it my way. That tends to alienate people. Not only that, but then I don't learn. If all I do is try to impose my culture, I'm not going to learn anything. So we are all losing when we do that. When we leverage cultural diversity in practice, again, as I said earlier, that's how we can promote creativity and innovation, real engagement as opposed to alienation, bring diversity and inclusion to the next level, including by promoting creativity. And by the way, I have a LinkedIn article. If you go onto my LinkedIn profile and look at my articles, one of the last articles I wrote is about diversity and inclusion 3.0. I'm afraid I don't have the time to develop this here today, but feel free to go to my LinkedIn profile. And by the way, to connect with me via LinkedIn, promoting performance and fulfillment as well. So I just want to stress that there is only so much I can say about this from a theoretical standpoint. The real learning comes from living the richness in cultural diversity. And hopefully you have all had that form of experience that you can remember. That's what we also try to promote in our seminars. We have certification seminars for the COF assessment. What people say in this 3-day program is that they've lived what they've learned. And that's what we try to promote. That's how you can really get it. When you go into an experience of being with different people, and that involves some challenge, some difficulties, some challenges. And if you are able, with intercultural coaching, to overcome that and to experience the richness of cultural diversity, then I think you can really get it and become an advocate for this. And I'm almost done here, but just to stress, somebody was asking me about what are the key intercultural competencies. I think you can see here it's about openness, humility, curiosity, and eagerness to learn, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, appreciating ambiguity and paradoxes, thinking and versus or, flexibility, benevolence, self-awareness. And I will end by saying, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I want to change myself. You all know this. The work starts with us. We need to set an example if we want to promote some change. And I will just leave you with some contact information. Again, I would be very happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook page. I have a website, Philippe Rozinski, with several articles that are available there at no cost to you. The COF assessment website, that's where you can also complete the COF assessment. Thank you. I wish you a great conference. I wish you all the very best, and look forward to meeting you at some point in person. Thank you.
Welcome back after that fascinating view of cross-cultural coaching. Still trying to assimilate some of the complexities of the framework. But Carol would love to hear your perspectives now. I know that you worked closely with Philippe in the past, so we'll hold any questions that people have on the framework until we've heard from you. So they have a lot of questions to ask you.
Good. Are you waiting for me to do something?
If you could bring up your presentation now.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. I'll go ahead then. Shall I? Great. Okay. Well, it's first of all, I have to say it's such a pleasure to be here and to be addressing coaches from all over the world and so many nationalities together. And it's so exciting for me to see this happening, because when I started in coaching more than 20 years ago, I don't think there was very much cross-cultural coaching at all. I think coaching was really just known in the UK, the English-speaking nations, America, Australia were very big on it. And my ex-business partner, well, my late business partner, Sir John Whitmore, he started some 20 years before I did. He was creating the GROW model in the 1990s. And by the time I got involved, it was still, there were lots of organizations that didn't know what coaching was. Somebody once asked me if I was involved with a bus company, and I said I was in coaching. It's been such a joy to watch coaching grow over the last 20 years and to see more and more countries become involved with it. You know, we've worked with 42 countries and delivered coach training to managers in 42 countries. And that's the demand that people have come to us and said, can you do this for us? In all over Asia, the Middle East. It's just wonderful. It's very exciting. I think it's because what people have discovered is coaching, it's like a universal language. When people learn the language of coaching, it cuts across all the differences of personality differences or cultural differences. And it's very easy to learn, we found. So I think that's why it spread so quickly, rather like the coronavirus, but a good, happy virus instead. And Philippe's made some really, I mean, Philippe's been in this area for so many years and has made some really good points in his talk, which I enjoyed very much, and set up some terrific frameworks and systems. And I think I'm going to concentrate to complement that. I'm going to concentrate on some examples of cross-cultural coaching and cross-cultural differences that I've experienced and my team have experienced. And then I'm going to end by offering you 3 tools, which I've found are the best things for helping to cross the divide and ease cultural differences. So here's a picture of my, where are we going? Can we move to the next slide? Well, this was working earlier. Raj, any idea why the slides aren't moving? I'm pressing all the buttons. By going full screen.
Carol, if you could look at the bottom of the slide, there are 2 back and forth arrows. If you move your mouse over to your slide.
Oh, here we go. Yes. There we go. So there's a picture of John Whitmore, the father of coaching, and the GROW model that he invented. And so let's look at some cultural differences and how they've shown up. How do cultural differences show up? Now, in my experiences, it's about the way people behave. It's about the things that they value, and the things that they don't understand and things that they don't do. And so, for example, I was once working with a group of German managers. And we're quite, in my culture in the UK, and I think in America and Australia, that positive feedback is something that's really highly valued. People at work like to hear a lot of positive feedback. It's very encouraging. Now, our managers are not always so good at giving it, but people like to receive it. And the German managers, I was very surprised because they said, no, we don't really do this. We don't really value positive feedback. It's just empty. If you give us some criticism, we want to know how we can improve. We just want to hear critical feedback. And that's what we really value. And that shows us that you care enough, you're impressed enough with what we're doing, that you value it enough to add to it, to try and help us improve it, which was a bit of a mystery to me. And also to the South African manager who was in the room, who was leading a team of Germans. And he bewailed, he said, it's so upsetting. I love giving positive feedback. And my managers won't let me give them positive feedback because they're German. He led a team of Germans. So that was a real learning curve for me, that some cultures don't value positive feedback. And I think there are quite a few that don't. And then we get the way people behave in a room. In my culture, when people are really enjoying something, they tend to join in, whether it's a concert or a training event or a party or something. They tend to get more and more lively and chatty and jokey and so on. And a colleague of mine worked in Finland with some Finnish managers, and he'd been sent their personality profiles and they'd all come up as extroverts. So he thought, well, this is going to be a really high energy presentation, and this demands a high energy presentation from me. And so he went in there full of laughter and jokes and high energy, and he was just met with silence. And the noisier he got, the quieter those managers became. And eventually one of them took him aside at lunchtime and said, you've got to stop, you're frightening people. We're a very quiet nation. We're really enjoying what you're saying. We're really interested, but we don't take part. We just like to listen quietly. So that was another learning revelation of the way different types of people behave. There's my favorite story is the one my Japanese trainer told me. She was delivering a program of ours in Japanese to Japanese managers. And we have an exercise in that, a very simple exercise. You'll be familiar with this sort of thing. It's the 5 levels of listening. See if I can get this to move again. Yes. And this is an exercise, as you can guess, devised to teach people how to really listen. In my culture, when people think they're listening, they're usually interrupting or stealing the conversation, hijacking it, or giving advice. So we teach them to go through this exercise to find out what listening really means. And my Japanese trainer came back after the program and said, I just had to reverse that exercise because my Japanese managers, will sit on an international conference call for an hour and not say a word because nobody invited them to speak. So I wish that would happen in my country a bit more. But then again, these are things that have to be taken into account. And then authority is something that comes up all the time in coaching. I think in all cultures, there's this big fear. They say, if I ask my employees to, instead of telling them what to do, they won't respect me. I'm the manager. They expect me to tell them what to do, and then they obey my instructions. And interestingly, it was an Indian manager who said to me once, we were training in Kuala Lumpur, and he said, well, I really thought this would never work with my people because they expect me to tell them what to do. And I thought I would lose my authority if I asked instead of told them. But I tried it out and it worked really well. And he said the surprising thing to him was it really increased my authority. And I think that's something to do with the humility. Leaders that show humility, it actually strengthens their power. And in India, of course, you had a great leader who was the example of this, was Gandhi. And I had the same experience with a trainer who was working in China with a group of Chinese managers who really said, no, we absolutely can't do this. It won't work in our culture. We're not doing it. And she begged them, she said, just go and try it once, try it for me. And they all came back and said it works better. So some cultural differences, I think, need to be respected, and others are just habits that can be changed. I think that when you come to body language, it's not only about words. There are different body language signals in different countries. And for instance, in my culture, we nod when we mean yes and shake the head to say no. And I know in parts of India, shake of the head means no. And I think in Bulgaria as well, they have the same thing. And then in parts of Africa and possibly parts of India as well, I think, it's very rude to look people directly in the eyes. And of course, one of our big parts of our training is to show that you're listening by look people directly in the eyes, focus on them very, very intently, and it will show that you're listening to them and that you respect them and so on. No, it's the opposite in parts of Africa. So this is probably one of those cultural habits that needs to be respected. You can't just walk in and change it. Whereas there are other cultural habits like the authority thing, which actually may be just habits. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe these things will work in other cultures. So we have to be sensitive to that and aware of that. Sorry, moving on too fast. Then it's not only about cultural differences. Philippe mentioned something about this. There's also personality preferences. And people can identify as extrovert or introvert. But it doesn't necessarily mean, like the Finns, that extroverts aren't necessarily noisy people. This is solely about how you recharge your energy. Extroverts recharge their energy with other people. Introverts recharge their energy by being alone. And so if an introvert spends too much time with people, they'll get exhausted and they'll need to shut themselves away for a day or two. I'm one of those. Even though I love being with people, party central. And extroverts are the opposite. They just want to be. Richard Branson, who we're going to go on, as you saw, to it in a moment. Richard Branson was the biggest extrovert I ever knew. He would fall out of bed into his first meeting at 8 o'clock, have meetings all through, including lunch guests, business meetings all through the afternoon till 7 o'clock at night. And then when the working day was over, he'd say, right, what's my schedule? Where am I going tonight? And so he only was happy when he was immersed with other people. Then you've got the people, some people are very systemic and they think things through very logically. Other people tend to follow their intuition. You've got the people who love detail and the people who maybe take the big picture. I'm definitely not a detail person, famous for not reading emails through to the end. And the trouble is that people might come to you and present a very, very detailed piece of work that they've been working on and researching in order to help you for a long time. And as they're presenting it to you, you're thinking, oh, is this person deliberately trying to bore me? And as they're presenting it to you, thinking, well, she's not even really listening. She doesn't respect my work, and I've worked so hard, and she's not interested. And it's actually not the case. Neither side is trying to offend the other one. They are just fish swimming in their own water, and both opposite sides are trying to do their best. So these are cultural differences, just as much as racial or international cultural differences that we have to take into account and be aware of. And I think with these different ways of working that people have, you can be stumped. Say you're the boss and you're thinking, well, there's 20 ways that we can do this task that we have to achieve. Which way shall I choose to have my employees do the task? And the one thing I learned, one of the many things I learned from Richard Branson, was that people will work best if they do the task in the way they choose. Let the person who has to do the work choose out of the 20 ways. And I worked at board level with Richard for 10 years. It was my first corporate role. So I learnt all about management from him, and he was certainly a coaching manager. But I think the key to his success was that he did, as it says in this quote, he did try to let everybody feel they were running their own company. So they were in complete control of everything that they did. And this issue of control is what it all comes down to. And I think why coaching is so successful. People need to feel they have a certain amount of control over what's happening to them and where they are and what they're doing. And it goes back to the millions of years during which our brains were developing. And we lived in caves. If you didn't have control over your immediate environment, it was a matter of life or death. You might be eaten by an animal, freeze to death, or the tribe next door might come and get you. So there's this very basic need for control, and we developed all these fight and flight responses. And today in the workplace, when you feel control slipping away from you, it can feel like a life or death situation, can't it? I imagine everybody's been through that at some point. And this is why it helps so much to give people a sense of control. And coaching, the ask and tell instead of tell approach, does give people that feeling of being a bit more in control of the situation. And that brings us on to our first tool, which is permission protocol. I developed this over a number of years. I noticed that the people who were really popular at work, there were certain people who never seemed to go into silos or develop enemies or take sides. Everybody seemed to like them, and they got on with everybody. Their bosses liked them, their reports liked them, everybody trusted them. And I started to notice specifically what these people did. And there was one thing that they did always, which was asking permission. So it would always be, what do you think if we did this? Instead of, my way's the best, we're going to do it like this. It was inherent in their body language, in their attitudes. How about if always there was this element of permission. And I sort of identified really 5 main areas where permission shows up and is really useful. And we can start by, I found that the stronger the situation of conflict, the less trust there was in the air, the more you needed to use permission. And you imagine yourself the last time you were in a situation of conflict. There might be somebody you always end up in conflict with, might be a member of your extended family, might be someone at work. And every time you're going to meet them, you say, right, this time I'm going to do whatever it takes to resolve this, and then we can be allies and we can move forward. And you have the meeting with them, And the conflict happens all over again, the same old pattern. And you think, why are they being so difficult? Why are they being so nasty to me? And they'll be thinking the same thing about you. And it's really, really hard in this situation to ask permission. This is absolutely the time when you should grit your teeth and try to do it. You feel like saying, I must insist that we do it like this. And if you can manage to say, could I tell you the reasons why I think we should do it like this? Or could I tell you what I think we should do? Now, it's not going to solve the conflict in a minute, but it's going to, the walls will start coming down. The person feels less threatened. They're less defensive because you've asked permission. So it's one great tool for situations of conflict. There's another tip. When you're in a situation where everyone's talking over you and you can't get a word in and you keep trying, and I really learned this in the 80s when all the people around the table were men and they could all talk over me. They couldn't hear my voice when I spoke up. I see someone's been in a similar situation. If you say, it's so simple, you just say, could I add something to what you just said? Now, this is the opposite of yes, but. If you say yes, but, then it dismisses everything that's been said before. And the person who said that will be dismissed as well. So once you say yes, but, they will stop listening. If you say, can I add something to that? You're saying, I value what you said. I value it so much, I want to enlarge on it and expand on it and add something to it. Now, it doesn't matter if what you then add is the opposite. It's you're offering it as an addition, not dismissing what they said. Feedback situations, of course, this works so much better to ask permission than to just give feedback. Just feel the difference between saying, come to my office at 5 o'clock. There's a client complaining about you. Or you could say, do you think we could have a meeting later? And then we can discuss that situation with client so-and-so. Immediately, the person's going to feel less threatened a little bit. They're still going to be terrified and that they're going to get the sack probably, but they'll feel less threatened and less stressed. And then they can think more clearly. And really, everything goes a lot more smoothly when people can think clearly, because everybody wants to do their best in the end and make the best of the situation. Then we're moving up the scale to just keeping healthy boundaries in place, which is quite important in cross-cultural relationships. You might have a new team forming, and especially these days, they might come from, a team of 12 might come from 12 different countries and 12 different cultural habits. And so if you ask permission in that team of, could I speak next? Could we discuss what we all want to achieve in the team? How does that suit you? Would it be all right if? It kind of demonstrates to everybody, I'm not going to tread on your toes. I'm not going to try and push you into doing something you don't want to do. I respect you. I respect your opinions. I want to hear what you say. And as the team leader, if you set this tone, then the team will imitate. The team always imitates the leader to some extent, and it will set the tone for the whole team. And finally, if you're with your best friend, the person you trust most in all the world, you probably will never hear the words of permission spoken because it's inherent in the relationship. The trust is there. You don't need to ask permission, but you'll see it in the body language, always with friends. They might be sitting like bookends. You'll notice when you are in harmony with people, if you look at your body language, you realize you're actually sitting in the same position. I don't think you can force that by copying somebody's position. I think that feels weird. But if you notice that your body language is not mirroring, particularly if you're feeling awkward, your elbow keeps falling off the table, or you don't know where to put your hands, you can think, why aren't we in rapport? Why aren't we comfortable? What can I do to make us comfortable and bring us into rapport? And I think that's the way to approach that. And not very good at pressing the slides. So, and finally, our third tool is related to this, and it's coaching feedback. And this is not a set of questions that you should ask. It's not a script. But this coaching feedback model, it's more setting out the areas that you can explore to be able to have a comfortable feedback situation. And the purpose of this is to get people to feedback on themselves. And if you successfully have a long conversation with them going through these areas, the chances are they will actually come up with the feedback themselves that you wanted to give to them. If it's a bit of learning or negative feedback, much better if they come up with it themselves and say, I want to talk about this. And you can say, how can I help? But there is a time, there is a point in this model where if they haven't come up with it, then there's the optimum point for you to come up with it. So you'll notice it starts always with the goal focus. It was John Whitmore really taught me this. Always start everything, any meeting, any conversation, start with the solution focus, the goal. What do we want to achieve? And whenever you ask somebody, you know, what do you hope to get out of this meeting? Imagine if someone's come for their staff development meeting with you, and they're a bit nervous that what criticism they're going to get. And you hand all the control over to them. What do you want to get out of this? What will be most valuable for you? How can I help the most? And you'll notice that the second question is quite neutral. What did you notice about your performance? Now, in my culture, if you say to someone, how did you do with that? They'll usually say, terrible, I'm useless at this. They'll tell you how badly everything went. If you say, I like your coat, they'll say, this old rag. We're very bad at accepting any kind of positive feedback. We tend to beat ourselves up all the time, although you might not realize it sometimes. But also, so always we'll start with this very neutral question. What did you notice? Not what did you think about your performance? What did you notice? Tell me about what happened. And then, so very often they will come back with just the negatives, especially in a coaching session where it's all private and they don't have to impress anyone. So I'll always then say, okay, we will discuss all that. We'll break all that down. But what did you do well? What impressed you about yourself? And it's lovely to hear them sort of, you can see the difference in energy and body language as they start to recognize they did actually do something well, and they are actually good at something. Of course, in some situations, you get the opposite reaction. I did a coaching demonstration once in the Middle East with a lady who was wearing a veil and very generously volunteered to be coached by me. But when I asked her, you know, well, what's your goal? I've achieved all my goals. Well, is there anything that's challenging you? Anything no, everything's good. Everything's good. And that was all I could get. Everything's good. Yeah, no, that's good. And I think it was because we didn't discuss it, but I think it was because in her culture, either her workplace or her nationality or whatever it was not a culture where you could admit to any flaws in front of a room full of people. And I think there are cultures like that. And there are people who feel like that in any culture. And so this question, what challenged you? It's a way of, it starts to open up the gates of being able to talk about the things that are not going so well. So we cover all of that. And then whenever we can, if we can give some authentic, positive feedback, in my culture, we put that in as long as it's authentic. Sounds like you handled that really well. You know, I can see that was really difficult, but I can see you did your best. And that just raises the energy. You know, we do that wherever we can, especially with coaching clients too. I once had a coaching client who she used to set herself 25 actions. It was weekly sessions. And she would always come back and she'd done more than the 25. She'd done extra things as well. And one day she said she had failed to do something. She said, oh, that's typical of me. I never get anything done. And I thought, what? Is this your twin sister I'm talking to? And I just, laid it out before her. You do these more than your 25 actions every week, which is more than anybody else gets done. And for the first time, she actually recognized that she was a person who got a lot done. So it's the joy of coaching, isn't it? So what will it be like when you can do that? It's lovely, this goal-focused question again, get people to imagine they've actually leapt over all of these challenges and things that seem insurmountable, and they're standing in the green grass where they've achieved, the problem's gone, they've achieved everything. Look around, tell us, what do you see, what do you feel, what you hear? It gives such a good feeling. You see the whole energy change. And again, it raises the energy, it helps people think more clearly, see the way forward. And here we get to, can I make a suggestion? Or can we discuss the difficulty that this client is having with you? And notice where it is. It's right near the end. They've had lots of time to pour out all of the things they want to talk about. They've been encouraged from us. We've raised their energy. At this point, they're probably going to be open to hearing our feedback, and they will probably take it as a helping hand that's being extended instead of, oh God, I'm being criticized again. And you'll notice, what have we got to start that with? Can I make a suggestion? Can we discuss? It's the permission. It puts the good barrier in there. There's a saying, good fences make good neighbors. I researched this. It exists in every language I could find in the world, even ancient Latin. There is a variation on good fences make good neighbors. And so it's having our boundaries in place so that we're not stepping on someone's toes or being too intrusive. And then, of course, in coaching, we tie all of the insights and excitement and everything down to action. What are you going to do about it in the future? So I think the coaching feedback model works really well in cross-cultural situations because you're not leading the process. You don't know if you're going to step on someone's toes or offend them or say something which won't work in their culture. So you're handing control of the process over to them. I think we skipped one here. Here we are. So there's my top tips here. Always respect cultural differences, because they might be things that shouldn't be changed. They might be things that can't be changed, like looking people in the eyes in places in the world where it's rude to look people in the eyes. Always challenge cultural differences, particularly in a coaching session. Is there a time when you've ever done this differently? Have you seen anyone else do this differently? Is it possible that you could try? Is there a safe situation you could try this out in? So always challenge cultural differences and always ask before you act. When in doubt, and I think a very large number of people, particularly in the workplace, are living in terror these days, tiptoeing through. All I want to do is my best. All I want to do is get on with everybody and help everybody move forward. But I might say something inadvertently. I might say something that offends, and I really don't want to do that. But we can't know everything about every other culture. If you always ask before you act, can we talk about this? Is it okay with you to talk about this sort of thing? If we always ask, then no offense can be caused and the control is given to the other person. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk. There is a long article which I put up on LinkedIn. You can link with me on LinkedIn, or you can find, I think you can see the bottom of the slide with the email address on it, info@coachingculture@work. If you'd like more information, I'm happy to send the PDF of the slides as well to anybody who would like it. And we do all of our training online and face-to-face. So whether you want to join an open course, we do open coach training courses to train people to be coaches. And we also do coaching supervision courses for experienced coaches, all accredited by the ILM. So you come away with an ILM certificate. That's the leading UK workplace accrediting body. And most of our work is done in-house, and we do that, as I said, all over the world and in several languages. So please get in touch if you'd like to hear any more about that. Now, I hope you've all enjoyed the talk, and I do hope we've got some questions coming up.
Thank you so much, Carol. I think that, as you said, complemented brilliantly the theoretical frameworks with some real live examples that you called out, as well as some real practical 3 tools that you shared with us. So thank you for that. We do have a few questions and probably have time to take 3 or 4 if that's all right with you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So the first one, Carol, goes back to the 4 or 5 points that you talked about in terms of cultural differences, and you talked about one aspect of body language. And there's a question out that says, in this world of virtual coaching and distance technology, how does one actually effectively run a coaching session across cultures?
I think that's a really interesting question. It's one I've been asked for 20 years, actually, before we had Zoom meetings and so on. I personally found that coaching, when then we were just doing it on the phone, I found on the phone it worked better than face-to-face for me, particularly if I had a headset where I heard the person's voice from either side, because it was in the middle of my head. And I found I had a stronger intuitive sense of what they were thinking and feeling when I only had the voice, when I wasn't actually looking at them and thinking of how they looked and thinking of how I looked. And I could hear the body language in the silences, sighs. So I think for me, my sense was stronger when I couldn't see the person, when they were just on the phone. I know other people who have a much greater preference for face-to-face and being actually live in a room together. I know other people who prefer coaching on Zoom. I find it a little bit difficult to sense to get the highest level of connection on Zoom calls, but I know other people who prefer it. And sometimes I think that people who are being coached prefer a bit of distance. So, they're talking to a talking head, not a real person. It's less personal. So I think that's it. You hear the body language in the tone of voice if you can't see it either on the screen or if you're live in person.
Thanks for that, Carol. We have a question from Puneet. Very interesting one. He says, since people could be part of multiple cultural identities themselves, religion, nation, they could be working, which in a coaching kind of engagement would assume importance. And there's a follow-on. And how does that play out in one-to-one coaching versus team and group coaching?
Could you I got some background noise here for a moment, Raj. Sorry, could you just repeat the second from the beginning of the question?
Sure.
From which?
This is from Puneet.
Sorry, you said which type of intervention was it? I couldn't quite hear.
Yes, so I'll repeat the question,
Thank you.
Carol. Since people could be from different cultural identities, multiple cultural identities themselves, religion, nationality, they could in a group and versus one-to-one, how does cross-cultural coaching interventions play out in that context?
Oh, I think yes, absolutely. And I think this is the big question, isn't it? And I think that's because the whole principle behind coaching is the ask instead of tell, which I talked about so much in my talk. I think as long as you ask, then people will reveal to you their cultural beliefs, values, feelings, and you can follow those. And if they're doing the same, that they ask and they're open. I always say that the basic premise in any cross-cultural relationship is listen and seek to understand. And if you've got a group where everyone is listening and seeking to understand, they will learn a lot more about each other, and it'll be very exciting to have the diverse mix, the cross-cultural mix. And there are some companies sometimes which try to say, right, we want all our employees to behave like this and be like this. These are our values. This is the sort of person we want. And for me, it's the opposite, because the things I'm not good at, like detail or so on, other people, I don't understand why they are or how they are. I don't even much enjoy being with them when they're being good at detail. And I don't understand why they enjoy it, but they can bring to the table the things I'm lacking. And this is the beauty of a great team, will be as diverse as possible, because everybody will bring different strengths to the table. So hopefully that is what your cross-cultural group will discover. And if there are people who are not opening up and trying to take control, I always think you give them a little bit of leash, let them have their say. I've often found there are people like this on day one of the training, and on day two of the training, they've had their say and they've quietened down and they've started to fit in with the group. So follow people. If they need to speak and make themselves felt, allow them to do that. And then gradually they will blend into the rest of the group. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Carol. This is another one, and I'm guessing this applies to maybe, the first part of Philippe's presentation. And Carol, I'm sure you're far more familiar, but the question is, and I'll read it out so I don't get it wrong. How similar is the COF framework to the COI indicators from TMC? I'm not sure whether that makes sense. I'm not familiar.
I can't answer that one. You'll have to put that one to Philippe.
Okay, fair enough. So Sriram, we will post that question later to Philippe, because unless they're familiar with the COI, so we'll park that for now. There's another interesting one coming through from Srinath, and this is you alluded to, and I think there was reference in Philippe's talk as well about not just cross-cultural, but cross-culture is not just nationality or demographics. It's also about organizational cultures, which in acquisition. So in your experience, Kyle, in those kind of situations, which is the more powerful determinant of working effectively across cultures within an organization? Is it the organizational culture that's more predominant, or is it the country, nationality, religion?
It's a good question, and I wouldn't be able to put I wouldn't be able to quantify it. It's because sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. I think the revelation to me when I really started thinking about cross-cultural behavior and differences, I realized that they'd been going on everywhere. As soon as I was 5 years old and went to school, there were people who were working. I think you can get two families growing up next door to each other in the same country, same types of work, same types of children, same ages. And the atmosphere they might be totally different cultures. The atmosphere in one house might be angry, or in another house might be very cold and controlling. In another house, it might be fun and joyful. And people it's like having a country in your head, and people bring their country in their head to everything they do throughout their whole lives. And when we're crossing into another country, we can just show our passports and we know we're in another country, and we realize they're shaking their heads when they mean yes, and it's all very simple. But when we're talking to someone who looks like us and sounds like us, and yet we've stepped into another country, it can be really confusing. And I think, again, that's where asking, the language of coaching, it seems to cross these bridges. It seems to be like the one size fits all for crossing any kind of cultural differences. I've been amazed when I've watched groups. We usually work with groups of 12. Been amazed how 12 people who quite often have come in with major differences, as soon as they will use the language of coaching, particularly permission, they can talk to each other and understand each other.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for that. I think in the interest of time, we'll probably hold off any questions, further questions, and share them back with you. But I wanted to thank you again for taking the time on a Saturday to be with us and share your perspectives. Really powerful set of complementing inputs from Philippe and yourself. It was lovely to hear the context of culture being put as peeling the onion and all the way through the COF framework. What really stood out to me from his framework, I don't know whether you or the audience noticed, when Philippe talked about application of cross-cultural coaching, and he talked about the 4 contexts. If you look at the top of your screen, Carol, he talked about individuals, teams, organizations, and societies. Our conclave is individual, teams, organizations, and systems. So it kind of resonated so powerfully with us. So that was a nice takeaway for me. And your 3 tools were practical. I can start using this tomorrow, hopefully. So thank you for a brilliant session. Thank you for being a participative audience. And wish you all a great rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Raj, and thank you everyone for listening. It's been a real pleasure.
Have a great day. Bye.
And you. Bye.